Dr. Jonathan Morrow is a popular speaker, author, and teacher, passionate about equipping parents and the next generation to build a lasting faith in a digital world. He is the author of several books and creator of Refresh Roadmap, which you'll hear more about tonight. Jonathan also has a popular YouTube channel focused on worldview, digital parenting, and culture. He currently serves as Director of Cultural Engagement and Student Discipleship at Impact 360 Institute. He and his wife have been married for 24 years, and they have 3 children. If you'll please welcome Dr. Jonathan Morrow.
All right. Well, it is great to be with you guys tonight, and really honored to not only be here this evening, but also kind of sharing during the day and talking about some big themes around building a lasting faith with our students. So I'm honored to be here and really looking forward to the time together. So what I want to start with is just kind of why I do what I do, and that really is this picture right here. As Dreamer shared, I've been married for 24 years. That's my wife. This was a trip we got to lead to Israel with our students at Impact 360. It's part of our discipleship program there. That's the Sea of Galilee. So I've got 3 big reasons why I do what I do, because we want our kids to be following Jesus not just when they're 8, but when they're 80. And I think a major factor in that is how we relate to these glowing rectangles and a lot of what we have come into our orbit in the universe every single day. Notice the 2 obedient dogs. Now, I'm allergic to dogs, so you can see how that went. We still have 2 dogs. And so they're outdoor dogs, but and there's bacon off to the side, so that's why they look so dutiful. So a little pro tip for you, if you got to take a family picture and you want the dogs, put a little bacon right here, snap it, and it'll be good to go, right? So, but it's great to be with you, and really looking forward to the time tonight. I think you'll find it practical and challenging and helpful all at the same time. But what I want to start with is this picture right here, and see, can you relate to this? I mean, how many of you guys personally sometimes, or with your kids in your house, or somebody you can kind of, it's just like, you're like, yes. And the first thing that I want to say is no one does this perfectly, and so this is a guilt-free zone in terms of talking about screens. My purpose is not to make anyone feel bad whatsoever, but my point is for us to go, okay, how do we fight for the hearts and minds of our kids? And how do we create a new normal? And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So we figured we'd start off a little interaction on this. And so I'm going to do a little pop quiz as sort. So I'm going to put 4 icons on the screen. And I want you to turn next to your neighbor and tell them which social media icons these are. So here's the first one, and then we'll review them together. All right? So turn next to you, and we'll start with this one. So turn to the neighbor next to you and tell them the 4 that you see. All right, sounds like you did that one fairly quickly. So what's the first one? Second one? Snapchat. Third one? Fourth one? Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, right? All right, now do the next 4. Turn to your neighbor. All right. So what's the first one? WhatsApp. What's the second one? People are like Tinder. If you don't know what Tinder is, you can ask somebody else. Third, what is it? TikTok. And the fourth one? YouTube. All right. And then our last one is these 4. Talk to somebody next to you. All right. So what's the first one? Reddit. Second one? Messenger. Third one? Fourth one? Twitch, right? Gaming streaming platform. There you go. All right. So we live in a social media universe, right? 90% of the total U.S. population uses social media actively. So this is just part of our world, okay? And that means our kids are growing up in this world, and we need to be aware of that, all right? So what I like to do sometimes is start out with a little word association game. Again, just the environment that we're in. So when you think about the screens in your home, your family, your friends, your kids, throw out some words that describe, give me one word association that you would associate with kind of how you feel about when it comes to trying to manage and navigate all the screens, your own and in your own world. So just let's throw out some words. What are some words that you think of? Overwhelmed. What else? Addicted. Next. Frustrated. Scary. Dopamine. What else? Consuming. What was what? Self-image. Yeah. What was that one? Isolation. Yeah. Yeah, but I heard overwhelmed, I heard, discouraging, frustrating, all those kind of things. And here's the thing, and this is why I'm so passionate about this. I believe deeply this is the number one parenting issue of our generation. The reason why is because everything is mediated through a screen. Education, friends, entertainment, all of that stuff. And therefore, if we don't have a plan for how to think about that, we're not going to not only survive well, but you can come on in, plenty of people, got plenty of seats, come on down in the middle. And so we're not going to be able to survive this well, but we're also not going to be able to lead our families well, okay? And so in light of that, we just need to be honest about what the current trends are. Look, kids on smartphones, 31% of 8-year-olds have a smartphone. 42% of 10-year-olds and 91% of 14-year-olds. So this is the reality. Now, I don't know what that is in your homes or anything else like that, but this means, and look, this generation didn't ask to grow up in this. They're the first generation that's had to grow up with all of these kind of things. And so sometimes people kind of like to kind of knock on Gen Z and stuff like that. Like, well, they're addicted to their phones. Well, we're all kind of addicted to our phones. So we can kind of talk about that. Maybe you've had this experience. Sherry Turkle put it this way: because of our phones, we are forever elsewhere. Haven't you had that experience when you're in the room and everybody outside the room automatically becomes more important than everybody inside the room? And whatever that is, that ding, notification, email, the alert from your sister's cousin's cat just posted on Instagram and you have to go check that out immediately, whatever it is, and all of a sudden, the few sacred moments where we have, maybe around meals or evenings or something like that, automatically is interrupted by someone outside of that room, and we're forever elsewhere. So in many ways, it's pulling us apart from the relationships we value the most, okay? And that leads me to kind of an observation that a sociologist put it this way. He says, look, this technology is new, rapidly evolving, and obviously addictive, and it's making people unhappy, unhealthy, and dumb. Kids scroll rather than run, climb, and play. They DM rather than talk. This crisis is not an ancillary cultural issue. It is transforming humans into quasi-cyborgs who seldom function without the aid of their ever-present supercomputer. Right? And so that's the reality that we see. Now, I want to give you guys some categories. I'm going to give you some tools. I'm going to give you guys a few principles, and then we're going to talk about some action steps. That's kind of what we're going to do tonight. But I want to define a couple of key terms, and this first one is really important for you to define because it's simply called culture, and I shared this morning with the students, but culture is simply what you come to see as normal without having to think about it. Culture is what you come to see as normal without having to think about it, and good things can be seen as normal, and bad things can be seen as normal. The problem is what? It just seems normal unless you stop and pause and reflect, okay? And so when it comes to our devices, this is especially the case, okay? Now, how does culture work? Now, I want you to understand this because as parents, as leaders, as educators, you need to understand how this is affecting society at a deep level. Okay, there's 3 normalizing forces of culture, okay? And they're these: institutions, ideas, and artifacts. Institutions, ideas, and artifacts. Now, what are some institutions that shape culture? The big picture. The church, that'd be one. What's another one? Sports, that'd be one, but bigger than that. School, right? That'd be education, that'd be another one. What about government? Government shapes things as well. Pop culture and media, that'd be another one, right? And so those are institutions. Ideas are what drive institutions. Okay, we'll talk about that. And then there's what's called artifacts. Artifacts. Now, I'm not talking about archaeology, but artifact is anything that humans create in terms of culture. So barbecue is an artifact, a computer is an artifact, water bottles, phones. Those are artifacts, and they shape culture. Now, here's what happens. If you have institutions which are embedded and driven by ideas and reinforced by artifacts, you get a lot of culture shaping happening. But also what you have for the first time in human history is you also now have a feedback loop, which is from social media. So almost real-time influence and reinforcement, right? That's how memes work. How fast does it take for a meme to become popular? Like instantaneously. And that is embedded with an idea, and it's attached to something, and it shapes people's perception, right? It normalizes something. And remember, culture is what you come to see as normal, like without having to think about it, okay? Now, so those are just a little bit about how this works, okay? Now, TikTok, for example, is the most popular, I would say it's the most popular app still for teens. Over 1 billion videos are viewed on TikTok every single day, and that's just increasing. 60% of TikTok users are Gen Zers. More girls than guys use TikTok, all right? You've also got about 1.7 billion users, 1.1 billion active monthly users, and TikTok users spend an average of 95 minutes per day on the app. That's a lot of 8 to 10 second videos, right? That is a lot. And I'm going to talk more about that in a little bit. But did you know that TikTok has taken over Google as the #1 search engine for this generation? And why is that? Now think about this. When you Google something, you get a summary, right? If you search something on TikTok, you get an influencer with a story who's probably really good at what they do. And they're not only, you don't have a printed version of an idea, you now have a person who is embodying and narrating that idea in a compelling way, short video, usually with catchy music behind it, whatever's popular, and all that kind of stuff, right? Fascinating. There was a New York Times study on this. What percentage would you guess of Gen Z, current teenagers, agree with this statement? I wish TikTok had never been invented. What percentage do you think they said? I heard 48. It's actually 47%. 47% of this generation said, you know what? I can't stop watching it, but I wish it was never invented. Right? And that's significant. And then there's Snapchat, right? 90% of all 13 to 24-year-olds and 75% of all 13 to 34-year-olds use Snapchat in the United States, right? Now, this is my second least favorite app behind TikTok because it is incredibly difficult to monitor Snapchat as a parent because number one, it disappears after 24 hours at most. They have these parental controls, which is laughable. They're so bad. They don't control anything. They actually increase usage. And so 2.1 million snaps are created on Snapchat every minute worldwide. And a lot of the sexting that occurs, images, nudes, all that stuff goes through Snapchat because it's sent, it goes away, and no one ever knows about it, right? And once it's read or screen grabbed, it actually alerts you to that fact. And so but what this does is it took the Messages app, if you've never used Snapchat, and it basically gamifies it, and it makes it a social media thing where it finds all of your friends, and everybody's on it. And so you can't not be on it, right? Because everybody else is on it. So it's one of those things. And so it's a very much super popular app that we'll talk more about. And then there's Instagram. That's the big three. You've got 2.3 billion users. 70% of Instagrammers are under 34. Average of 53 minutes a day, right? So TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, probably the three, and then YouTube are the four most popular apps when it comes to students in terms of watching those kind of things and listening. Spotify, Apple Music, and we can talk. And in the Q&A, I want to be helpful to you, so we can talk. We can talk music, we can talk movies, we can talk entertainment, we can talk whatever you guys want to talk in terms of what's helpful. I just want to set the stage for us tonight. So Steve Jobs was interviewed once, and they said, look, so your kids must love the iPad, asked Mr. Jobs, trying to change the subject. The company's first tablet was just hitting the shelves. They haven't used it, he told me. We limit how much technology our kids use at home. Because the creator of this device knew how powerful it was. So he's like, nope, my kids they don't have that. That's not what's for kids, okay? Now, I do want to put an asterisk real quick. There is a redemptive way to use technology, and there's a way to do that the older you get. One category, and I'll come back to this, adults using tools like social media and technology is a very different question than kids using these things, okay? So we'll just kind of file that one away, but we'll come back to it, okay? Now, this came out, and this was the New York Times. A dark consensus about screens and kids begins to emerge in Silicon Valley. If someone can read the byline, what does it say? I'm convinced the who lives in our phones? The devil. That's the New York Times. This is like the Southern Baptist Quarterly. I mean, this is saying, like, the devil lives in our phones. Why? Because it's doing things to us that are not good. All of us, okay? Wall Street Journal. Digital addictions are drowning us in dopamine. Rising rates of depression and anxiety in wealthy countries like the U.S. Our brain gets hooked on these neurotransmitters called dopamine. Dopamine reinforces a habit loop, which is why it feels good when you complete a habit. And what happens is you get a little hit, and you get a little spike of dopamine, and then you have a little mini depressive state following it. And so it's a manufactured way of doing this. And so that's attached to our devices, okay? And I'll come back to this, but these things are related. So a habit has a cue, a trigger, and a reward, right? Something makes you think of something. There's a trigger that activates it, and then there's a reward, a dopamine hit that completes the loop. That's why you do certain habits. And habits, in some way, habits are neutral. Your brain is it's built to be efficient. And so if it just keeps repeating what gets rewarded, okay? And then it trains it that way, all right? Now, the one who created the like button for Facebook, this is Chamath, and he talks about this. He says, look, I feel tremendous guilt. The short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops that we have created are destroying how society works. And what's interesting, have you ever noticed on your phone, what motion do you use to refresh your phone? You swipe down, slide down, pull up, right? What does that look like? It is built on the exact same, and they've literally spent billions, and millions, hundreds of millions in research. But basically, to follow, it's like slot machine. Ooh, what notification am I going to get? Swipe down. What comes up? It randomizes it, it gamifies it, built on the same neurocircuitry. Okay, Harvard actually studied this. This is not known. Platforms like Facebook, Snapchat, and Instagram leverage the very same neural circuitry used by slot machines and what? Cocaine, to keep us using their products as much as possible. So these are fundamentally addictive devices, like intrinsically addictive. And have you ever noticed why there's a new update and now your phone buzzes and it dings and it slides? Why? Because you're getting a little dopamine hit every time you do that. It's a gamification. If you have Apple Pay or Google Pay or something on your phone, what happens when you kind of hit the thing? It's like, ooh, you get a ding and an alert. It's like, man, I just accomplished something. I spent money I didn't even have, and I feel great about it. Like, this is awesome. Ding. And then you're like, wow. It's like you scored again, right? So again, people have spent hundreds of millions of dollars with neuropsychologists and addictive behavior and all those things to figure out how to get more and more of your time, my time, and our kids' time on that device. That is not controversial in the sense that it's not known. It's in all the studies. It's in all the journal articles, okay? Now, and then there's the idea of, this was an article, and more keeps coming out on this one, how Google took over the classroom, right? Because they give really cheap Google Chromebooks, and they've created Google Classroom. So everybody turns in their turn their devices that way. And again, I understand there's benefit to that. I talked to a lot of schools. They're like, we couldn't really do what we do without using these things. But just keep this in mind. Google is not benevolent. They're not a philanthropic organization. Google is not even in the technology business. They're in the information business. They want a customer attached to an IP address from a very young age. And if you get used to a Google ecosystem now, guess which one you're going to use later when you grow up? Google. So again, just being aware of that, and the more that we use these tools, and the more that we put everything online for our kids to do during school and at home, it's reinforcing all of these loops. So there's never a time they're away from their screens. And so the question is, what do we want to do about that? There may be ways to maximize efficiency, to get the things we need to done on it without doing everything through Google Classroom, things like that. But all that to say, you're going to see more and more studies on this. There's actually a ton of work that's already been done on this, how reading something digitally, the very same content on a screen versus a physical book, activates different parts of your brain. Very same content, very same words. So it's cheaper and faster to have everything digitized. It's also worse for the student. It lowers their attention span. They can't take notes. They do worse on tests when they actually use Chromebooks rather than using hands. I teach at Impact 360 Institute, which is a gap year. We do summer program. It's outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And about 5-6 years ago, in our classroom, we actually took away all devices in the classroom so that we taught them how to take notes again. And there's actually more and more studies on this, that the very process of writing tactily actually reinforces. You won't be able to capture as much information, but students do better on tests by doing it this way than by trying to type it and keep up, or just by using Quizlet or things like that. Again, these can be helpful tools. I'm not saying not, but all I'm saying is whenever we think about trade-offs when it comes to technology, we need to kind of factor that in. So another thing, smartphones are the new civilization crisis. One person put it, smartphones are the new cigarettes. They should not be in the hands of children. Like, has anybody ever seen these old commercials back in the 1900s, as my kids talk about? Like, that talked about, Camel cigarettes, the number one brand recommended by who? Doctors. And you're like, what? And so in the same way, there was a time we look back on that and think how ridiculous that is. There's going to be a time, probably 20 years from now, when people are looking back on this social experiment we're doing right now with screens and our kids, and they're going to think the exact same thing, because these things are that addictive and bad for us. All right. So France, not known as a bastion of conservatism, banned smartphones from schools. They're like, look, we're taking these things out of schools. The evidence is too high for this. You see it happening in California, even with more liberal progressive policies out there. They're like, this is not working. Florida is attempting to ban social media. Utah's attempting to do that as well. So you're starting to see a little bit of a movement, which is good news for you as parents and grandparents, because anytime, remember we talked about 3 shaping forces of culture? What was the first one? Institutions. So if institutions can come along and reinforce something that's a good habit that a parent is trying to accomplish for the good of their kids, that's a win. Right? It's not the only solution. You're not going to legislate your way out of this, but legislation, whenever you can accomplish it, is a good thing to reinforce and create categories so that you can actually move forward. Now, the inevitable author, Kevin Kelly, he's the founder of Wired Magazine. He made this statement, and I think he's spot on. He says, look, we are morphing so fast that our ability to invent new things outpaces the rate we can civilize them. Doesn't it feel like that sometimes? It's like something new's created, everybody adopts it, and then like 5 years later, somebody finally asks the question, like, wait, should we have done that? Like, should we come to some policy around? Well, it's all right, that ship has sailed. That train is down the tracks. And so in many ways, that's what we're having happen not only with social media and smartphones, but also AI. I'm going to share a video clip on this. And so watch this and pay attention to it and see what happens what goes on the screen.
Download now.
Okay, were you able to read that a little bit? So what happened? That she wakes up to a what? A breakup text. So what does she do? She goes into Chat GPT. It generates a response. She sends it back to her boyfriend, and he responds, what? Wow, babe, I had no idea. Right? And so you've got this whole dynamic to download an app, and so now you have generative AI interacting with our kids, which is not worldview neutral, by the way. And every one of these social media platforms has a bot of sorts. There's a Snap bot, like Snapchat. There's things you can interact with. And so what's happening is this is kind of a silly level and a sad level in some ways. But now imagine the teen who's not talking to their parents about what they're really struggling with, and now they're just interacting with a chat bot that's not worldview neutral, that's going to serve up whatever is popular and current to help try to solve their problem, right? And we'll talk more about this, but this is also around kind of a lot of the mental health questions and anxiety and depression and all those things, gender confusion, all that stuff is wrapped up in this as well, which we'll come back to in a little bit, all right? My friend David Kinnaman, in his book Faith for Exiles, they studied this and found that even using conservative estimates, the typical young person spends nearly 20 times more per year using screen-driven media than taking in spiritual content. That's just the law of averages. So which one do you think is going to be more influential, more shaping, more formational? And yet, in all of our environments, and sometimes in our youth groups and everything else, what do we do in order to try to be relevant? I'm not saying there's not a place for it. We try to introduce more screens, more technology. They're already swamped and saturated in technology, in screens, in digital information. So you have a limited amount of time. So one of the things that I would ask you to think about as parents and leaders and educators and people in the church is what's truly scarce is this, where you can get in a room face-to-face and talk about things and be present together, and when our kids can do that as well. And so how do we do more of that in the shorter amount of time that we do have together, okay? Now, in the 1980s, my kids are like, back in the 1900s, I'm like, no, not the 1900s. And I was like, this 1980s is the generation that gave you Top Gun, thank you very much, and Karate Kid and everything else. You wouldn't have Top Gun Maverick if you didn't have Top Gun back in the 80s, all right? But this was a book that was written in the 1980s by Neil Postman called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And he's talking about television in the 1980s. But I want you to substitute the word television for YouTube, social media, Netflix, whatever kind of modern expression you want to put in there. It says this: those things are culture's principal mode of knowing about itself, therefore, and this is the critical point. How television stages the world becomes the model for how the world is properly to be staged. Now, what's his point? When you came into this room this evening, you didn't think about it. You just came in and sat down. But which way are all the chairs facing? This way. This environment is staged for you in a certain way to affect a certain outcome. And it's unconscious. You just come and participate. You show up, and then the environment reinforces a lot of other things. This does the exact same thing about every question and idea you could imagine for our kids, right? So when it comes to truth and purpose, morality, love, God, gender, sexuality, authority, science, any of these things, dating, relationships, it's presented to them as normal through a screen, and then they just see it as normal. And culture is what you come to see as normal. And if they're never away from their devices, guess what? They're never going to have the opportunity to go, is this good that I see this as normal? Like, should that be normal? It is. Everybody does it, and we just all do it. It's like a script. But should it be? Because here's the reality. And the social scientists back in the 1960s said, we become what we behold. We shape our tools, and then our tools shape us. Now, sometimes when we think about our devices, we go, well, as long as you don't use this in a bad way, then it's neutral. Let me help you understand this. This is not neutral. It's always shaping us. Technology always shapes you. For example, if tomorrow morning we all showed up and we all had a shovel and we were going to dig ditches for 8 to 12 hours a day for the next 2 weeks, just using the tool of a shovel, Would that shape and affect our body? Yeah. Repetitive action physically changes the way you are. Whatever you do with it, in some ways, is a secondary question. So just using this tool, like a shovel, is shaping you. It shapes the way your brain categorizes information. It shapes how long you're willing to think about something. It shapes, not only that, it shapes what your expectations are. All of those things are happening just because you use it, even for very good things. Let's say you're using good things. It's still shaping you. And it's shaping you differently than opening a book, or shaping you differently than taking a walk, or having a conversation. Those are doing different things to you. Does everybody understand that? And so this device is not neutral in and of itself. Tools always shape us, right? And then we eventually become kind of what we behold. Layered in on that, and because we're involved in, we're here at a church tonight, and we're thinking about the school as well. Look, worldviews are shaped subtly and incrementally over time through what we consume, and then a paradigm shift occurs. I've been working with students for about 17 years now, and I can tell you that it is usually not a crisis point when they have a shift in their faith. They don't walk away all at once. What happens is they drift away over time by 1,000 little nudges. The reason why I'm so passionate about this is I have the privilege of getting to speak around the country and talk to parents and students and all that, but after a while, I kept having the same conversation with parents, and here's what it was. They'd come up after a talk like this, and they'd say, look, I have a junior in high school now, and when she was in 9th grade, we gave her a phone, and she's not even the same girl. She still goes to youth group. She still goes to a Christian school, and yet she's almost unrecognizable in her worldview about where she was even 2 years ago. And what happened? What happened was this happened. Culture is what you come to see as normal without having to think about it. And the shaping power of this, unless we do something different, is going to conform them to whatever is normal around them, right? Because a student wants to belong, and if they find belonging in those places, that's what they're going to be drawn to, okay? And so it's like this. If we were having a conversation and we're talking, and then somebody came up here while we were talking and just kind of nudged this water bottle this way a little bit, and I'd be like, oh, stop, what are you doing? And I move it back. We keep talking, but maybe I kind of lose sight of this and somebody keeps nudging this thing and all of a sudden it's way over here. That's what happens to worldviews, because first video, oh, yeah, I saw that. First post from my friend and what she was wearing or what he was wearing or what he sent or the kind of language they use or the way they talk about relationships or what's acceptable or not. Or, the first time somebody questioned their faith, it was like, wow, you really could become a new gender? Or like, well, maybe, I do feel bad about my body, so maybe I don't feel at home in my own body, but I keep, and then you don't pay attention to it. It's like, well, maybe there's a different reason I don't feel at home in my own body. Maybe I'm in the wrong body. And this thing gets nudged way over there, and that's how worldview formation happens through a screen. It gets 1,000 little nudges, right? So Cornell researcher Janice Whitlock put it this way: if you wanted to create an environment to turn out really angsty people, we've done it. They're in a cauldron of stimulus they can't get away from, or don't want to get away from, or don't know how to get away from, right? And I think we've all felt that. I mean, there's times when this has been great. I've been able to kind of catch one of my kids' games if I had to be out of town for something, and somebody could stream it, and I'm like, okay, cool. And we use it to kind of, find our way around, because maps usually works, right? Until it doesn't, and other things. But then we're like, I just want to throw this thing, away. I want to, get rid of it, and we can't really get away from it, right? But also, the second thing I want to do is I want to help you understand kind of what happened as a culture, because everything shifted in 2009 and 2012. And it's important for us to understand this, because our kids are never going to know this unless we tell them, because this is what shifted. Because up until 2009, the smartphone was invented, iPhone was invented in what year? Yeah, 07, 06, right in there. And then you've got social media. Facebook was created. But originally, Facebook didn't have this innovation until 2009. And you know what it was? The like button. Because up until then, you just saw what everybody did, and that was it. It wasn't interactive, right? But then you got to vote on it. Then you got to interact with it. And there was a public metric for whatever is posted. And that innovation set off a very massive shift in the way people did social media. And then you got the retweet button. See, and this is what's called the frictionless spread of content. Because until that point, you had to wait for it, actually type out a response, and then share it. Now you could hit a button and you could take an idea, an image, or something else and automatically disseminate it instantaneously. And then people could do what with it? Like it, love it, heart it, right? Or then eventually those kind of things with social media. So you had a public metric, and then you had frictionless spread of content. But then we all had too many friends, right? And you can't get all the way through all of our friends. So how are we going to solve that problem? Well, somebody created a what? An algorithm. An engagement algorithm, which is based on what? The frictionless spread of content and the what? The like button, right? And then all of a sudden you've got this loop, and then they came up with a Facebook share button as well. But then there was one more piece that was missing from this new recipe of social media. And you know what it was? How are you going to monetize this? So for the first time, your attention became monetized. It's called the screen economy for a reason. There is a price tag attached to you. So I don't know if any of you guys saw this, but Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook Meta, was before Congress, and there were some protesters wearing a shirt that said 235 on it. And basically their point was that was the price from internal leaked memos that the individual teen was worth in dollars to Facebook for the amount of time that they could consume. $235, if I can, that's one, they quantified it. It's an algorithm. So they don't care what they put on there as long as they get the time of you in front of a screen that becomes monetized. So much so that social media ad spending is projected to reach $300 billion. Well, it did reach that by the end of 2024. $300 billion. But don't worry, it's just a harmless little screen. You know, kids, I'm sure, are up for it. They can handle it. We can handle it, right? No, this is an amazing amount of attention designed at that. Or as Tristan Harris put it, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. I would much rather pay for an app than get a free app. I at least want to know what it is I'm being monetized with, without ads and everything else, because there is no such thing as free, right? Because they want your time, they want your attention, whatever they can get you calling back to. They know the odds, they've run the numbers. It is very much, you and I are very much a math problem, right? And so teens feel this. 50%, Common Sense Media just did another study on this. 50% of teens feel addicted. This isn't the adults in the room. This is them. They're going like, I feel addicted to my mobile devices, my screen. TikTok was recently sued by, I think, 17 attorneys general, and someone accidentally leaked the redacted version of what was in those reports and the evidence. and what they found in there, TikTok could quantify the number of videos it takes for you to become addicted to their platform. Anybody want to take a guess at how many videos it takes for you to become addicted to TikTok? So want to guess? 6? Higher, lower? Do I hear 7 or 10? Yeah, up, right? But at 8 to 10 seconds, right, 260 videos. Do you know how fast a teenager can get to 260 videos in 8 to 10 second clip? And then the number of minutes, so you quantify that to minutes, that's 35 minutes. And they've got you. Like your brain, not you because you're like, oh, surely not. Nope, your brain, that's why TikTok is the most addictive app on the planet. They have cracked the code. All right, that's why Instagram and Snapchat want to be TikTok when they grow up. And now you have YouTube Shorts and you have everything else, right? This is literally what their own research said. TikTok's own research states that the compulsive usage correlates with a slew of negative mental health effects like loss of analytical skills, memory formation, contextual thinking, conversational depth, empathy, and increased anxiety, according to the suit. So again, these are well-known, not well-publicized, but well-known issues. You could throw a dart and hit a journal article, so here's one that I'll just share with you. The behavioral addiction of a smartphone use begins forming neurological connections in the brain in ways similar to how opioid addiction is experienced by people taking OxyContin for pain relief gradually. You just get addicted, and then you literally have to detox from it because your brain gets used to the little micro kind of state where it goes up, and then you have a depressive state after it, right? And one of the reasons why I'm kind of just sharing some of this, the neuroscience of this, is because if we don't understand some of this, I don't think we'll be as motivated to do what we need to do. Because unless we see this for what it is, and awareness really is the gift that leads to action, we're not going to do much about it. It's also leading to disconnection. So Sherry Turkle is a psychologist at MIT, okay? She wrote a book called Alone Together, Why We Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other. Now, before social media came out, she was very optimistic about how it might bring people together in connections, all right? But here's what her assessment was. These days, we expect more from technology than we do from each other. Technology appeals to us where we're most vulnerable. We're lonely, but we're afraid of intimacy. And so from social networks to sociable robots, we're designing technologies that will give us the illusion of companionship without the demands of friendship. Let me pause right there. Do you know it's hard to be a good friend? And it's hard for our kids to find good friends because you got to show up, you got to be present, thick and thin, good and bad. It takes time, it takes vulnerability, it takes some risk, right? So we turn to technology to help us feel connected in ways that we can comfortably control, but we're not so comfortable and we're not so in control. And so, I mean, just think about the number of times, I'm sure no one in this room has ever done this. If someone called you that you didn't want to talk to, you just kind of go to voicemail. You're like, doop, or you don't respond to them, right? Because you're in control, right? You get to be the king of your little screendom right there, right? And so you think you're in control, but it's shaping you in ways that you and I are not always aware of, right? Now, another thing that we have to be honest about is that this is not a surprise. So if you look at any measurable category of when smartphones and social media came on, correlation with increase in all of these areas is really well established. For example, suicide rate, 18 and 19-year-olds, up 56% from 2008 to 2017. Depression, 2009 to 2017, doubled. Anxiety and hopelessness from 2008 to 2017. What happened again in 2007, 2008? Smartphone. What did you get in 2011, 12? You got Instagram, you got social media coming on the scene, becoming really popular. And so you track these things in terms of mental well-being outcomes, and it's a very clear pattern of what's happening. CDC, 57% of girls this past year said they felt persistently sad, right? That's significant. Young men, 2 out of 3 on the study said, no one really knows me. And yet we're all online. We're all connected. We're quote unquote connected, right? I'm going to show another video that I think a band captured this, and they made a music video on this. But this is an important video. But look at how they kind of capture this phenomenon that we're seeing. Good.
We're the lonely generation, a pixelated version of ourselves, empty conversations. I'm disconnected now, I'm by myself. Here we are, left behind. Looking through a screen makes you feel alright. Another day, another time. Looking in the wrong place for something right. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Looking in the wrong place for something right. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Looking in the wrong place for something right. We're the lonely generation,
What phrases or words stuck out to you? Just go ahead and shout them out. What was that? By myself. I disconnected, now I'm by myself. A pixelated version. Right? What else? Looking in the wrong place for something right. Right? And so you see all of these things, and so they talk about in this song, and I think they brilliantly talk about this lonely generation, and that's what it's doing to us. That's one of the unintended consequences of screens. And so another dynamic that's all at play, because one of the things my job, and I work with students, is to pay attention to culture and what's shaping them, so therefore we can disciple them and protect them and empower them to follow Jesus for a lifetime. And one of the things you have to pay attention to in this generation is this question around mental health as well. But this is an interesting phenomenon because this is Abigail Schreier in her book Bad Therapy, Why the Kids Aren't Growing Up. She says, in virtually every way that can be measured, Gen Z's mental health is worse than that of previous generations. Youth suicide rates are climbing, antidepressant prescriptions for children are common, and the proliferation of mental health diagnosis has not helped the staggering number of kids who are lonely, lost, and fearful of growing up. What's gone wrong with America's youth? There's never been a moment in all of history when we've talked more about mental health issues, and there's never been a time in which all the measurables are worse than they are now. So maybe what we're doing and how we're approaching it is not helping. Now, let me give a quick disclaimer. I'm not saying that there isn't ever a time for medication or there isn't ever a time for good counseling and biblical counseling. That's not what I'm saying. But what our society has done for our kids is it's done two things. It either gives them a pill or gives them a screen. And usually they're both connected, because the pediatricians now say, well, don't take away their screen, because that's their what kind of mechanism? Their coping mechanism, which is also making them sad, lonely, anxious, depressed, which is feedback loop back into, well, now they need a pill not to feel that. And that's what's happening with this generation by and large, and it's a significant issue we have to pay attention to, right? So again, there's a lot of complexity there, I recognize that, but by and large, there's a lot that we need to deal with. And so whenever I share on this topic, I can share a lot of statistics and I share a lot of things, but I've never come across a video that probably gets at the shaping nature of social media more than this. Now, it's not a graphic video, but it is not an easy video to watch, but it is a couple of minutes. It was actually created to kind of talk about how screens disciple our kids in different ways. So play this video, and then we'll talk about this.
And let's sit down and I will read you a book.
You are so beautiful to me.
Good job, Mary.
You are so
Hello, we're Mary and Addie's comedy show.
to me. Can't you see? Everything I hoped for. You're everything I need. You are so beautiful to me. You are so beautiful.
You want a small oasis summer when your favorite product is here. All right, that's it.
To me. Can't you see? Everything I hoped for. You're everything I need.
Get yourself a tape measure. Thigh gaps are in.
You are so beautiful to me. You are
so beautiful to me. Can't you see? You're everything I hope for, everything I need.
You are so beautiful to me. Can't you see?
As a dad of two girls, it just rips my heart out to watch that video every single time, because you noticed when she got the phone at the first time, you noticed how she played without the phone at the beginning, and then she was slowly discipled into how she's supposed to relate, how she's supposed to see herself. How do you take a selfie so you look thin? How do you, all of culture is what is comes to see as normal, right? And yet, it just over time, that's what gets normalized, and that's what gets internalized, right? And that's what's happening. That happens on gender confusion, because you have someone going through puberty and they're like, I don't feel at home in my own body. Well, which one of us felt at home in our own body when we went through puberty, right? But now you have the ability for that to have feedback loop. Well, maybe you're in the wrong body. Maybe you need to think about changing genders or identifying a different way to feel better about that. That's the solution, or whatever it may be. But that's how powerful these devices are. And if Dove body soap recognizes that, then shouldn't the church, and shouldn't we be able to go, look, things have to be different in how we relate to this, right? And the reality is, we check our phones 344 times a day. That's a lot, right? As many of 71% of us check our phones within 10 minutes of waking up. Again, guilt-free zone. I'm just talking about how we use this, right? That's the first thing. 70% of Americans check their phones within 5 minutes of receiving a notification. Harvard and UCLA have done studies on this where they're like, it takes you about 25 minutes to get focus back after you've been interrupted. So if you have about every 5 minutes and you get nudged, you never have deep thought. You never have focused time to think. The average American spent nearly a month and a half, 44 days, on their phones in 2022. What if I came in here tonight and I was like, hey, guess what? You get 44 days to spend however you want to. Would you, just think of the amount of time that is in a year, and you could go do something different with it. The average American will end up spending 21 years, 4 months, and 29 days online across the course of their life. And those are just massive, massive statistics, right? So basically this, like, technology always has unforeseen consequences. And it's not always clear at the beginning who or what will win or who or what will lose. I think it's clear that we're losing right now, right? So in summary, we're seeing skyrocketing anxiety, depression, and loneliness. Studies, show this over and over and over again. We see addiction to distraction. We must be distracted, right? We see the fact that we're exposure to harmful content, no matter what the parental control app, and I'll talk about some better ways to do that. And then you've got disconnection from family and real life and relationships. That's happening. And then, because we're also followers of Christ, you see a weakened faith and worldview confusion and relativism and skepticism around what they believe and why they believe it. So in light of that, you're like, why did I come to this thing tonight? I feel bad. Where do we start, right? That's why I feel like this guy. You're like, where do we start? That's a lot to do. But I want to give hope, because there is a way to do things differently. And that's what I want to do with the balance of our time and our Q&A and some resources, because it's so important that we do something differently. But we're not going to do something differently unless we're truly convinced that there's a problem and something needs to change. So hopefully you've seen that something needs to change. Because the reality is we don't want to be conformed to the pattern of this world. We want to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. We want to do the normal that God gives to us. So I'm going to give us a couple of suggestions on two sides of the equation. How do you help your kids build a lasting faith in this world? briefly, and then I'm going to talk very clearly and give us some steps on how do you create a new normal and begin to do that in your home, okay? And with your kids, with your grandkids, in your classrooms, things like that. So I'm just going to scratch the surface on these first 5. I just want to let you write these down, because if you want to know, look, our kids are going to make their decisions. We can't choose for them. Wish we could. We can't. God's going to do what he's going to do. So what do we have influence over? This. First one is spaced ask questions. In your home, is your home a place where your kids can ask questions, express doubts, and share insecurities without us freaking out? Okay? And this is, I'll call it the freak out rule, which is freak out on the inside. Hey, Mom, I don't know that I believe in God anymore. Tell me more about that. So what you want to do is hit the pause button, because our temptation is to go, well, haven't you been in a Christian school all your life? Haven't we told you? Haven't you read these 30? You're never getting on. Like, rather than do that in that moment when they share something honest with you, just say, tell me more about that. That's a really good, thanks for sharing that with me. Can you tell me more about that? Why do we do that? Because if they got up the courage to ask you and share something with you, if you freak out, who's the last person they're going to share it with the next time? Us, right? And so we want to have warm relationships with our kids and create a space for them to ask questions and walk with them through these things, okay? That's the first thing. Second thing they need reasons for faith. Christianity is not about blind faith. They need rational anchors so that they won't drift too far from what's true. Because they're not always going to feel what's true, but they'll still be anchored to what's true. Okay? So that's why they need to understand why Christianity is true. They need reasons, which I'm going to be speaking on tomorrow morning about how do we know God is real, for example. Reasons separate from the Bible that are completely consistent with the Bible. Because we live in a culture where the Bible is the question and not the answer to many people. So they're like, well, the Bible says so. They slide the Bible over here and go, well, I don't believe the Bible. What else do you have? So how do we anchor those things rationally as well as biblically? Like there's a 2-step process to that. So they need to know that there's good reason why they believe what they believe. Now, I give whole talks on that, so I'm resisting the temptation to give you a bunch of cool things to talk about right now. But I've written some books on that. Welcome to College, Questioning the Bible, Is God Just a Human Invention? Things like that. But reasons for faith, that's number 2. They need rational anchors. Third, they need wise relationships. And here are the 4 relationships that every child needs. They need a personal relationship with God. Now you go, well, isn't that obvious, Jonathan? And they don't need a transactional relationship with God. They need a personal relationship with God. And then they need, as far as can be, a healthy relationship with their mom and dad. It's a fallen, broken world. That's not always possible, but wherever it is, they need a healthy relationship with mom and dad. They need mentors in their lives. And they need wise peers, wise friends. Proverbs 13:20 says this, he who walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools suffers harm. Okay? So they need wise relationships. If you drew 2 circles, a big circle and a small circle, the smaller circle for a teenager is Christianity true? It's a question. But this bigger question is, do I belong? And they gravitate towards the do I belong question first, and then their worldview usually follows that bigger circle. It's like a gravitational pull. Now imagine the power, though, when you have a do I belong question and an is Christianity true question where that's the same friend group. And that's a really powerful thing, all right? 4, they need a grown-up worldview. They need more than coloring book Jesus, right? When they're 5, a coloring page view of Christianity is sufficient. When they're 17, it is not. They will discard it. They'll just get rid of it. They'll have a sentimental view about the way things used to be and camp and all that, and it won't do any work for them in the real world. They need a grown-up worldview. By the time they get to high school, they're doing AP whatever and calculus, and they need to have an understanding of what Christian actually teaches, why it's true, how it explains things. As C.S. Lewis put it, I believe in Christianity as I believe the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. A good Christian worldview should bring reality into focus and into clear view. And then lastly, to build a lasting faith, every child needs vision for life in God's story. This is the internal. This is how do I join in with what God is doing? How do I use my gifts, talents, passions in the Great Commission and to fulfill my calling in this world? And so they've got to have a drive, right? So they you need a place where they can ask questions and be honest about what's going on in here. And they have warm relationships with you and mom and dad. And where you apologize, like that's so powerful. Apologize to your kids when you need to. Like, I'm sure we all make plenty of mistakes, so they know that, we know that, but do you ever own it? Well, that's a key indicator of keeping a warm relationship with your kids. Do they ever know if you apologize? Especially dad. I'm going to say that because the research on that is very clear. If dads are never engaging their kids at that heart level, that's gonna lead to some trajectory we don't want there. All right? And then they want reasons for faith, wise relationships, grown-up worldview, and vision for life in God's story. Okay? That's the lasting faith side. I've done a lot more work on that, but I want to make sure I give you some actionable stuff on how do we create a new normal when it comes to this thing. Because this right here is the gateway to all the other things, okay, in this new world we're in, okay? The first thing you need to understand is what freedom is. And the first challenge comes to us as parents, okay, and as grandparents. Our culture defines freedom as the ability to do whatever you want to do whenever you want to do it, okay? So if mom and dad, if we approach this device that way so that mom and dad can do whatever we want to do whenever we want to do it with this, but you're a kid and you can't, you've got to wait till you become a grown-up. Then you can do whatever you want to do whenever you want to do it. That they're going to rebel against that. They're going to see right through it. And that's what you're basically doing is you're training. So if mom and dad never have any boundaries, any transparency, any accountability, then guess what they're not going to have? No boundaries, no transparency, no accountability. So, for example, my wife has all my passwords. She can get in. There's no right to privacy for me. She can get in anytime she wants, on any account, any email. There's no, she's got access to that. And my kids know that, all right? Because this is not a private device. There's no right to privacy there. There's accountability. If I have that, then our kids are going to have that, right? And so freedom is what we need to give them, which has the right wants and the right restraints. And one of the restraints needs to be around our devices, okay? And the way I like to illustrate this is by one of my favorite movies and books, Lord of the Rings. Any Lord of the Rings fans in the room? Who is this, by the way? Does anybody know? King Theoden, right? He forgot he was a king. Don't let your phone and social media enslave you. 1 Corinthians 6:12, I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but I will not be mastered by anything. So here's the first challenging question for you and I. Have you been bewitched by this little glowing rectangle? Or are you free? Are you free to say no to it? Because here's what I promise you. For us to see lasting change in our kids and the next generation, we have to go first. We have to be different, okay? Not for weird, legalistic, God's going to love you more kind of reasons, just it's good for me and it's good for you, and this is how our family is going to navigate this. Because look, culture is what you come to see as what? Normal. Normal gets you depression, anxiety, loneliness, and everything else. If we do nothing different than the whole world around us when it comes to our devices, Christian school, youth group, or whatever, it doesn't matter, you're going to get the same results. So we're going to be countercultural for the right reasons. So how do we do that? The first thing you need to do is think about donuts. All right? Now, has anybody ever been driving down the road and there's a particular company which has a sign, and what does it say? Hot donuts now. Do you guys have a Krispy Kreme down here? Oh, God's got to give us great. No, I'm just kidding. He's protecting you, all of you, right? But hot donuts now, right? That, forever and forevermore, I want you to see that image of hot donuts now as the notifications that show up on your phone, that pop up. It's like a hot donut now sign. Check me, email, notification, Instagram cat video, whatever, you know? My friend's sister, you haven't posted in a while, right? And so here's the thing. I'm going to give you 4 things that you need to start doing for you and your kids. The first one is this question. Which notifications do you need to turn off? Now notice, I didn't ask the question this way. Do you need to turn off notifications? No. We already know that's the Lord's will. Like, that's what the Lord's will is. Because here's the thing. You just go into your phone in the settings, and even before you leave tonight, I dare you. I have people do it every time. Turn off your notifications, and then only turn on the ones that you need when you start missing stuff. But right now, when you download a new app, everything gets a notification. There's a new chicken sandwich. There's a new this. There's a new that, right? And your kids, if they have Instagram or Snapchat, do you know how many notifications they're getting? And if they're on a group chat and all this, I mean, they're constantly interrupted. So the first thing you need to do is turn off your notifications, and then you need to help them begin to navigate their notifications. Now, two things that are prior to that. What if, remember I said this was a guilt-free zone? It is. What if your family just needs a reset? What if it's been, you know what, we haven't done anything, there's been no boundaries with these devices, we're busy, we're overwhelmed, I don't understand technology anyway, here's your phone, oh, your friends are on it, they're a good Christian family, I'm sure that's fine. Here's how you need to navigate. So there's two ways you can approach it. You can, hey kids, guess what? Come on in here, went to a seminar tonight, phones right here on the table. You're like, throw them out the window, moving vehicle. That is one way. Not sure it's the most effective way. The second way is like, hey, you know what? Here's what we're going to do as a family. We're going to track, over the next 2 weeks, we're going to print a chart out and put it on the fridge and put mom, dad, our family, everybody's got a name, and we're going to put 2 boxes that we're going to measure for the next 2 weeks. Our screen time, how much time we're all on our devices, and then there's one layer in where you can actually look up how many times you've picked up your phone. It says pickups. It's how many times you've willingly interrupted yourself each day, okay? And it's a guilt-free zone, and then after 2 weeks, you're going to print that, you're just going to have that, you're going to have some ice cream together, you're going to sit around a table, and you're just going to go, is this the way that we want to live as a family? Because it seems like this number of hours, this number of interrupt. So what we're going to do, mom and dad see this as an issue, and we're going to start with us because we just honestly, frankly, haven't paid attention to it, and that's on us. But in the same way, it's good for you to get exercise and eat broccoli, and we're going to go to church together and things like that that are just good for you as a person and good for your soul. We're also going to start to have boundaries with our devices. And you're going to lead and you're going to go first, okay? You're not going to guilt. You're not going to yell. You're not going to smash their phone with a sledgehammer yet. No, I'm just kidding. That's where you're going to start, okay? Second thing, their devices are going to sleep outside their room. Do not leave a phone in your kid's room when they're living under your roof. They're not going to sleep. They're going to be constantly interrupted. They're never going to be away from it. They're going to be tempted by things. Harmful things will find them, insecurities, and then just literally the effect of that on them. They never get time for their brain to recover each day. So put the phone outside the room and put a screen time limit and a bedtime on it. I'm going to share a resource. In my course, I go into this refresh roadmap where I walk through how to do all this stuff, okay? But phones, if you did nothing else after you left here other than put their phones outside the room so they can go to sleep and it shuts down at 9 or whatever and it wakes up at 8, you will already have made a massive difference in their life so that they're not doing that. And for us too. Buy them a fancy alarm clock with nature sounds or birds or whatever happens. Just figure it out. But it doesn't need to be by their bed and when they wake up, okay? Now, why do we check our phones so much? I want to give you my favorite acronym. I invented this, called BLATH, okay? Everybody say BLATH? So never forget this, BLATH. This is why we check our phones, okay? First word, first letter B is for bored. We're just bored. So I'm going to pull this thing out and I'm going to check it. And then the second thing is we're lonely. So we pull this phone out and we check it. And then sometimes we're anxious. That's the A, or angry. We pull out our phones and we check it. And then sometimes T, we're tired. So we'll pull out our phone and check it. Or sometimes we're hungry. So we pull out our phones and check it. Right? So, and then I probably need to put an S in there, blaths, for shopping. Maybe I'll add that. Because sometimes we want to, then I'm going to shop for something that I don't need. And it can get here in 10 minutes, right? DoorDash, whatever, right? So So what you need to do is have a plan for you and your kids to what do you do when you're bored, lonely, anxious, angry, tired, or hungry. Okay? That will help you along the way. Next, is there an app that you need to delete? Okay? Is there an app that you need to delete? And the Lord's will is yes. I just don't know which one it is for you first and for your kids second. Because you can also tell them because, oh, Mom, Dad, why are we doing this? Well, then you can tell them, it's like, well, actually, here's the app that I deleted for this week so I can be more present and focused. Or I'm deleting Instagram when we go on vacation. Or Facebook as a parent, mom or dad, because I want to be more present. And you lead the way. There's few dogmatic statements that I will share, but I will share this. Our kids will never have TikTok, and if your child has TikTok on their device, I would uninstall it immediately. It is the most toxic app on the planet. It's the most addictive app on the planet. I'm not saying that Reels are all that much better. I'm just saying TikTok is about as toxic of an environment, and the algorithm is so incredibly powerful. You will do your child a world of a favor if you'll uninstall that. Okay? Just get rid of it. Okay? So is there an app you need to delete? Isolate that. Another thing you need to think about, is there anyone you need to unfollow for you personally or also your kids and their friend group? Is there a child that consistently leaves them out, tags them in a post that mentions them, is rude, like all this kind of things? Like, or you follow somebody that the algorithm, because whoever you follow, they're going to build an algorithm on. And they're just going to serve you up a conveyor belt. Young men are going to get these images, they're going to get these kind of things on their discovery page and all this stuff. Young ladies are going to get the whole version of this as well, right? So is there certain people you need to unfollow because it's not good for your soul, right? And then lastly, I've already talked about this a little bit, is there a screen time limit or a bedtime that you need to set? Yes, there is. All of us need it. Go to bed. Like, don't just endlessly scroll, right? Because your kids need limits. Whether it's Netflix, whether it's, Instagram, whatever, for you, I've got limits on my phone that just alerts me to it. I would highly encourage you to install screen time or use some app so that Instagram goes to sleep after 10 minutes. And you're like, wow, 10 minutes? Like, yeah, 10 minutes. Why? Because then they can ask for more time. And then you can approve it. Now, is it annoying and bothersome to have to respond to it? Yes, it absolutely is. Is it worth it? You better believe it. Because then you actually are involved in a dialogue. Make sure you have to have permission before they can install an app. And do not give them your screen time password. Even if they're yelling, going down the road, what's the password? I need to download the app. Don't give in. Pull over, type it in, give it back to them. Okay? Why? Because we all need boundaries in an environment. If they need privacy, they don't get privacy with a phone. I buy our kids a journal. They can write whatever they want in it, and I don't read that. But the phone, I can check that. Mom and I can check that at any time for any reason. That's true of me. It's true of them. Okay? It's really important. Because, again, we've got to do things differently. All right. One or two more things, and we'll go to questions, Dan. Here's a question to ask your technology. It's going to take a lot of courage, though. Because you got stairs or you got an escalator. Which one are you going to use? An escalator, because it's easier. But here's the question to ask your technology. What are you making easier that needs to be harder for me? So, for example, tap pay may not be the best idea for you. Maybe you need a few steps between you can just, ding, spend money, right? So is there something in your universe that you need to set some limits on? And then you can model that in your family, and then you can also do that for your kids as well, okay? Because here's the reality. Proverbs, a person without self-control is like a city with broken down walls. We've got to cultivate self-control. So I want you to take 60 seconds of silence. Don't leave or anything. Just think about this question. What is one digital habit that you personally would like to change? Just pick one. Don't pick 20. Just pick one and think about it for yourself in light of what we've discussed tonight. All right? So I want you to write something down, type it in your phone if you need to, whatever you need to do. But what is one digital habit that you would like to change, that needs to change for you? And I always, whenever I share with parents, it's amazing how bold and courageous people are, and sometimes they'll just share some of those. But would anybody like to share one? Because it always encourages everybody else. Because you're not the only one, I promise. Is there one that came to mind? Yeah.
Viewing the phone or social media as a form of relaxation.
Okay.
End of the day, kids going to bed, husband's going to bed, it's like, okay, I can get on Pinterest or I can get on Facebook.
Yeah.
And viewing that as my form of relaxation.
Okay. So maybe not associating with the form. Thank you so much for sharing that. Maybe one or two others. What's something that, you know what, this needs to change? What is it?
Not picking it up like first thing when you wake up.
Yeah, that's huge. That will be what an amazing thing to start, maybe with a prayer or a thought or even a phrase of scripture. The Lord is my shepherd. How simple. Lord, you're my shepherd. And I'm just, be my good shepherd today. You know, that's such a good idea. What's maybe one more? Those are two great ideas. Who's got one more for us? Putting it away at a certain time at night? That's a great idea. You go ahead. I don't want to deprive you. Yeah. Yeah, and it just sucks you right in. Thanks for being honest. Those are great things. All right, so that's great. This is the most powerful app nobody's heard of. You can turn it off. Like, you do know this thing actually turns off, right? Just show it who's boss one time and just turn the thing off. In fact, I'm going to do this right now. Like, everybody, if you want to be courageous for the next 5 minutes, turn off your phone. Look at this. I'm doing it. And my head didn't explode. The universe did not stop, you know? Just do it. Because every now and then, it's a good practice to go, I'm in charge of this, okay? So here's the thing. Then be thinking of your questions. We'll finish with some Q&A. But my passion is so that you can build a plan, and I want to give you the opportunity to do that. I developed this course called Refresh Roadmap. I've given you some actionable things already. You can scan this. Everybody should have gotten one of these little cards on the way in. I'm giving you 50% off this until tomorrow night. So it'll basically be less than taking your kids out to Chick-fil-A or anywhere to eat. About $29. You can have this lifetime access to an on-demand course that's going to have walkthroughs. It's going to have how do you build a social media contract with your kids, how do you do all this stuff, some of the content I've covered. I'll give you 100% money back. If you don't like it, email it. I'll literally return you the money, okay? Why do I do this when I speak? Several years ago, I'd gotten to a place where I wasn't being super healthy and physically in the way that I wanted to. I couldn't develop the habit to get back in the gym or run or do what I needed to. And then I decided, I was like, all right, I need to do something. And so I was like, I'm going to run a Spartan race with my son, my oldest son. And I was like, at the time, I was like, couldn't do a pull-up, but I'm going to do this Spartan race where I may not survive. This is going to be great, right? And so what did it do? So I committed. I paid for a ticket. And then I knew I had to train because that day was coming. I committed to something. And then I've since run 4 of those with my son. In fact, yesterday morning, he ran one, and then my youngest daughter, who's 11, also ran one, right? Why do I say that? Sometimes we have the best of intentions, and nothing changes. So I want something to change. I want you to have a new normal in your family. We're not going to do it perfectly, and you can't do everything, but we got to do something. And so if you write down the word family 50, you've got till tomorrow night at midnight for this to be 50% off. You can have lifetime access for this. It'll reinforce what we've talked about. So what are your questions, thoughts? We can talk about Netflix. We can talk about movies. We can talk about culture. We can talk about phones. We got about 5 minutes or so. What are some things that you want to talk about? Because I'm sure, yeah, go.
Think about content creation versus like content.
Consuming? Yeah, so people are like, well, people need Jesus on TikTok. They absolutely do. One of my best friends is Sean McDowell. He's got a great TikTok channel and other things like that. He's a creator. He's not a teenager. So there's creators making stuff for people who are on TikTok who are not finding any other spiritual content those ways. That's different. Honestly, your 14-year-old doesn't need to be on this. Here's what I would say. No smartphones until high school. No social media until 16 at least. That may sound radical, but let me say this. What's normal is getting us depressed, anxious, mental health issues, and everything else. And there's a way to do that that is sustainable. You just have to be intentional about it, okay? And that's what would be best for your kids. And so that's the difference. So consuming versus that. What else? Yeah.
I mean, not really a question, but I don't really hear a lot talked about the other winner in all of this, which is big pharma dosing out
Yeah.
antidepressants.
Yeah, there's tons of medications because it deadens them to all these things. And what's not been studied, and the New York Times did an article on this, when you start stacking medications, nobody studied the longitudinal effects of all of them together. This is a whole different topic, but it's really become to the forefront because of all of the gender confusion and the hormone therapy. So, for example, even birth control pills, there's a big movement on a lot of doctors will prescribe birth control for acne or different things or secondary issues, but it's actually changing you hormonally, and nobody's tracked yet how that reacts with an anti-anxiety medicine or antidepressant medicine when you start stacking those things. And yeah, so there's just a lot around that we need to pay more attention to. It's a good question. Other thoughts? A couple more questions about maybe how to put this into practice or where to start or challenge you're facing. Go ahead. Yeah. So that'd be great. If they're still in your home, then you have influence. And by the way, if you have toddlers, this is the best time because then you can grow up and create a new normal for them that they grow up in. So if you're young families, this is so vital. There's never too late to start, and you lead and you go first, especially if you're paying for it and if you're in their in their universe. So maybe you have those conversations. I'd have to talk to see kind of where you're at, but you'd have to say, I would say, look, while you're in our home, these are what we do to be spiritually healthy and physically healthy, and that means we have limited time on screens. And so college student is a little different dynamic than a high school student per se, but not completely if they're still dependent on you. And so there's ways I wouldn't start with leverage first. I would start with asking questions first. I would say, how is this going? How do you use this? What problem is it solving for you? Things like that. It's not too late in that sense, but there are still some influence you can have, but it's different than, say, when they were in high school or in middle school. So, but while they're still under your roof, you still have influence with them. You just have to invite more of it, but you do still have influence, and you still do have leverage. I just wouldn't start with the leverage first. Because like all of us, we don't love the power play kind of dynamics. And so, but eventually it's like, well, if you've got money to pay for your cell phone plan, but you're not contributing rent or you're not contributing to your food, then we'll kind of make that, there's some ways to kind of talk about that from, okay, if we're going to be grown up and take ownership and be an adult, then here's what that looks like. Part of that means caring for your mind and your soul. And if you're a follower of Jesus, that's an area of digital discipleship that we need to also surrender to the lordship of Jesus because it shapes and affects us. So there's some things we can talk about there, but yeah, it's you want to kind of ask some good questions in light of that. It's a good question. Maybe one or two more, and then we'll wrap it up. Yes. Yeah. Great question. All right, so one of the best questions you need to ask your technology is, what problem are you solving for me? The unfortunate thing is this thing is the Swiss Army knife because it solves all problems. It does my math, and it's my alarm clock, and it's my radio, and it's on my food, it's all of it, right? So pull those apart. So my oldest son is 19. He's in college. He has his own phone, but he's still on our family plan. We still have kind of boundaries with that and conversation around that. My 17-year-old now, she just turned 17. All right, and so I'm the sentimental one, so I'm like, no. But she does have a phone, so she can contact us. She does have bedtime, but we're still an emergency bypass, which means she can contact us. She doesn't have social media. Now there's better tools than ever. If you have middle schoolers or a young high schooler, you could buy like what's called the Wise phone. You can Google it. Wise phone is a great phone. It's just a phone. Imagine that, a phone, and it does directions and things like that, but it doesn't have an app store, and it doesn't do social media. So you can actually, and in the course, I go into some different ways that you can solve this once you figure out what problem you're trying to solve. Is it, I need to know where they are? Well, you can do that through this app without giving them these things. So that's the kind of way we've navigated. My youngest she's about to turn 12. We have a family phone that she can take pictures with, like when we go on vacation or something like that, or watch some shows in the car, but she doesn't text on it like with friends and that kind of thing or anything like that. So you want to do a stair step, and I kind of go into more detail on some of that in the course as well. Last question, who's got one? And then I'll bring Dreamer up to pray us out. Yes, ma'am.
Mine are still toddlers. But
Great.
Did your kids ever have like any kind of resentment or like rebellion for you not letting them have phones and social media?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, they weren't always going, yay, this is so good. Thank you, Dad. Oh, great. You get to be the guy who teaches on this? That's so good, you know? So what are you going to teach on this weekend? Yeah, so yes. So it's never been perfect. However, I've tried to always, and my wife has done a great job of this as well, is we try to narrate as they're going, you know, because my daughter would be around her friends, and she would see whenever they're together, they sit together and then they're on their phone. And then she would feel left out, right? Because, well, they all feel left out because they're not talking to each other. They're only texting or watching or whatever. So from a rebellion standpoint, there would be times from where they would, without talking about a child specifically, there might be times that they'd try to get around a boundary or bedtime, or they wanted to be on this app, or they added somebody I didn't know about or something. And I would just have conversation, and I'd be like, all right, there'd be a boundary. It's like, well, tell me more about that. Why do you want to follow this person? As much as you can, do that in a normal, non-freaking out way with you going first, because they knew that I've got accountability and transparency for me, so I'm not asking them to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. And it's like, look, I love you, and this is what's best for you, and so this is the way we're going to do things. And you can always ask us questions, and then we'd have a social media or a phone contract, which kind of spelled out their responsibilities and ours. So when you do these things, you get these privileges, and when you don't, you lose these privileges. So it's really clear. It's not surprises and things like that. So it's never perfect, but it's better than doing nothing. And where we actually have conversations along the way. So, but rules without relationship leads to rebellion. So that's where you got to have relationship and always pursue the relationship in the heart of your child as best you can. But it will make a huge difference. But I wouldn't change not giving them those devices at those ages, especially what I know about the research and everything else. 2020 happened, and so my son got Instagram in 9th grade because the youth group was the only way they were communicating on Instagram. I was like, you're killing me, guys. You are killing me. The church was the reason my kid had to get Instagram at 9th grade. I'm like, oh. But anyway, so we had conversations about it. But, so that's what I would say there. There's a lot more we can say. I'll be up here or out there as we wrap up. I want to honor everybody's time. But thank you so much, and I hope this is helpful. And please take advantage of that if you find that helpful. I created it. You have lifetime access to it. So hopefully this is giving some tools and some encouragement. You can be different. You just have to lead and go first. So thank you very much.